Welcome to Fantasy Femme Fatales, where two fantasy readers dive headfirst into the worlds of romantasy and dark romance. From fantasy deep dives to book club banter, we're talking plot, magic systems, and all the spicy details. So pour a drink, grab your latest obsession, and let's turn the page together.
We are diving into Anathema by Keri Lake. We're going to be covering all of part 1 from Maevyth's point of view. So that's up to and including chapter 24 or page 231. So if you haven't read to part 1 of Anathema yet, please come back, listen once you're done. There will be spoilers in this episode, so we don't want to ruin anything for you. Our next episode, we will be focusing on part 1, Zavander. There's just so much packed into part 1. We don't want to rush. So we're going to dive into the world building, the plot so far, characters we've been introduced, a little bit of that, a bit of the politics we're seeing, and all of the burning questions. Before we get into the book, let's talk about Keri Lake, because Keri Lake is just serving up so much already, and she deserves some credit.
Yay, 100%. Keri Lake, I was very new to her. She's really one of the first dark gothic romance authors that I've ever read. She's got 5 series published, including book 1 of the Anathema duology, and 5 standalone books. I've read 2 of the 5 standalones so far, and she's insane. I think she's probably got me in the biggest chokehold since ACOTAR. As some of you know, Sarah and I started out our journey with ACOTAR, and I thought for sure diving into an author like Keri Lake might be a little bit too much, too fast, I guess. But I've accepted it as my fate. We love her. We love her smut. We love her style. I feel like she's done this morally gray and in some cases black character development super well, especially with the relationship building between her main characters. Every single page you read, it just gets you so excited to hear more of these stunning worlds that she builds. One of the other things that I noticed about her writing style, and I'm curious to hear if you feel the same way, Sarah, but I feel like we all have this idea of a book in our head, and we tend to think that it's our own personal creation of how the book kind of comes to be. But I feel like with her words, she's able to bring out these themes, styles, colors that seem to be felt by a lot of people who read her books. I dove into Nocticadia between ACOTAR books, and I was super excited to get to read Anathema as part of our little book club. I'm not afraid to say at this point, probably one of the best authors that I've read since Sarah J. Maas. But I really want to hear what you think, Sarah, as this is your first foray into Keri Lake's little world. And I feel like it is a really big deviation from what we've read together so far.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because I haven't read many fantasy romantasy books as of yet. Like fantasy sci-fi has definitely been more in my wheelhouse. So I didn't have a ton to compare it to, but I definitely went in hard after ACOTAR, and already I can just tell she is an author that I am just going to love reading. I love all of the details. I love an author that can just like pull me into a world and make me think that it's real. And this world is dark and I don't care. I just want all of the details and just to be so immersed. She's got like an aesthetic is what I'm picking up from this book, which is so cool to read something that makes you feel like there's an aesthetic attached to it. And we're all reading the same book, but it's happening in our heads. Like, I love that.
100%. Just the way that she describes certain things, it feels like everything is cold and murky and desolate. It's probably some of the best I've read so far, or at least like the most in depth based on the books that we've already forayed into. So I'm super excited to dive in.
I'm a big like Dune fan. And so when I started reading this book, like I am just getting the little breadcrumbs of all of the Easter eggs and the little trail that we are going to be led on. Like I can just feel it. So I'm very excited. And I love that we're doing this episode and laying that foundation so that we have as clear of an understanding of what's going on as our listeners do, so we can all just really enjoy this book. I feel like this is like my favorite kind of story. Okay, so this is definitely a change of pace for what we have been reading lately. So let's talk about why. Like, what led us to Anathema? Why do we choose to bring it to the podcast and talk about it?
Well, we were using the spin wheel method. Surprisingly, very, very intense. I was on the edge of my seat the entire time trying to go back and forth with Sarah and pick a book. But we did end up taking a little bit of a break between our second series to give Anathema a go. For some reason, it just hadn't made it to the top of the list yet. But at that point, I had already read Nocticadia and I loved the main character, Dr. Death. If you've read Nocticadia, you know exactly what I'm talking about. But it is a little bit more of a gothic sci-fi. I loved it, but I was pumped to see Keri Lake sort of meld the worlds of fantasy and romance. So this is the first time I've read any of her books that are in a fantasy setting.
Well, yeah, I mean, we definitely had Anathema on the list for a while, but I think we were really trying to prioritize these other series that were really getting such great acclaim, that were really appealing to us. But the cover of Anathema alone just is appealing to me. It was all over Book Talk. It's relatively new. Like, we're filming this in December and it came out in September. So it's only been around for a few months and it was just starting to get that little like bubble up of attention. And it was like November. Feels like the vibe is right. Let's see what this story is all about. And all the book talkers saying all the things about it, they basically revealed nothing. They didn't tell us a thing, just that it's amazing. And so I love that. Like, don't spoil a thing. I don't want to hear about the tropes. I just want to know that the world building was amazing, the story was amazing, the characters were amazing, and like, I am in.
I think she's going to be an all-time favorite author for me, especially now that we're diving into this one. I feel like my eyes are open. I'm having shower thoughts, dreams about it. It's pulled me right in.
I love that. Okay. So we have a lot to talk about today. Like, there's so much packed into this. A little background on Anathema. What's the vibe? So it is set as a spellbinding gothic dark fantasy about a shunned woman who's forced beyond the mortal realm's forbidden boundary into a terrifying world of cursed souls and grotesque creatures. We have mortals on one side, and we have mancers / mages, maybe not quite as sparkly as the fae that we love, but they are our magical beings, and we are being presented with a world divided. Now, the cover gives us a little bit of a glimpse into what we might get with the phrase, "Only the banished know what lies beyond the woods." So here we are, Anathema, the first book in the Eating Woods duology, which has recently been hinted as maybe being a trilogy, which is very exciting. So we will see what Keri Lake has up her sleeve. Perfect book for those who enjoy a plot-heavy and atmospheric story with a unique magic system. Yes, let's do it. And a slow burn romance, maybe with a little bit of horror. So how are we feeling, Kara? How does that sound?
I mean, I'm a slut for the slow burn. I don't even care if it takes me 10 years to get to it, as long as I'm being teased. And the horror, like, I can totally get into the horror. I feel like she's been really good at painting that picture, at least in the books that I've read. So I definitely feel like it's gonna get grim.
Yeah, I'm not afraid of a little horror. Horror with purpose. It's like spice with purpose. Like, give me the motivations and I'll take it. Like, just make me believe it. And I'm there.
Oh, she's gonna make us believe it.
She's gonna make us believe it. So before we get into the story, we get this nice little letter from Keri. She wants to set our expectations, tell us what's to come. So she says, if you're anxious for the spice, it'll come eventually, but know that this is a slow burn. You'll be tormented with pages of unbearable tension before we arrive at the climax, so to speak. Please take this into consideration as you venture into this world. Don't come at Keri for not giving us the spice right away. That's what she's saying. She's saying, I know it's going to be painful, but you know what? It's kind of fitting. So
It
Here we
is
go.
fitting, especially for a book this plot heavy. I feel like it makes perfect sense for her to build up that world and tease us a little bit with that. I also don't even mind it. Like there's
No.
so many other books that I can just read a few pages and jump in to some spice.
Yeah.
Don't know that I expect that here. And that says a lot considering I'm definitely a fiend for the spice.
Yeah, we want to earn it a little, you know?
Right?
Make it worth our while. Okay, so we get into the book. Our introduction is this like dark and ominous prologue. And I am a sucker for a good prologue. Set up some mystery, some dark motivations right off the bat, and give me kind of like the ground little whispers of what's going on in this world. So our prologue is set 200 years ago. Lady Rydane sacrifices her infant son Zavander to the sinister mage Kadavros, who is the most dangerous mage in all of Aethyria, in exchange for protection from the Selasians, who we will later learn are ruthless warriors known for brutality and violence. So Kadavros curses Zavander using dark magic, but then things take a pretty strange turn when he attempts to consume the child's magic, and Zavander has these mysterious black markings that appear, written in ancient Primerian, and they happen to protect him, and they cause Kadavros pain instead. And Kadavros is pissed. Like, he is not happy about this. He does not want things to go wrong. So he throws the baby into a fiery fissure, which I imagine to be like, you know, like a volcanic crevice,
Same.
only to find him unscathed. And then we've got Branimir, the grotesque, scary brother, who snarls the words, "What is taken will never return." So, what the hell?
You summarized it so well because a lot happened in that prologue.
Yes. I mean, we've got some like really creepy vibes right away. Kadavros, obviously not someone we want to be hanging around with or anything. The whole thing with Kadavros trying to harm Zavander and then backfiring, we're getting some mystery. And I gotta say, like, you know that I hate on all the book tropes because anything's a book trope, but innocent character, seemingly useless, manages to put the worst mage ever in his place. Like, I love that. It's giving Harry Potter versus Voldemort. And like, you, Zavander, baby Zavander, do what you do.
Right off the bat, for me, I was like, what are we getting here? Like, this is definitely not like a Keri Lake book. Again,
Okay.
I've never read any of her fantasies. So I'm like, what is this intense prologue? We've learned, I feel like 1,000 different bloodlines. Like I'm lost. And it's classic, I think, for most fantasy that I've read to be super confused at first. They're just building layer upon layer of so many systems on top of each other that I'm like, I'm going to need to take some notes.
Oh, yeah. We've got a glossary, Kara. Like,
We do.
we've got a glossary.
I'm surprised there wasn't one included. I've seen that before.
There is.
Is there one? I must have completely missed that.
Yeah, it's in there for us. She's not beating around the bush. She is telling us she is building a world, and we can jump right in, or we can try to just pick up the pieces as we go.
But we get that big prologue, and then I'm pretty sure we just shift right into Maevyth almost right away. But I'm
Yeah.
finding myself needing so much more background on Kadavros.
Mm-hmm.
Like this bargain that he's made with the Redane family. They can't be the only family he's bargained with. So I feel like there's more tea to come. I don't feel like Keri Lake would dangle that in our face for nothing.
Yeah, I mean, you don't go around calling someone like the most dangerous, terrible mage that ever was for no reason. So I don't think that's the last of Kadavros that we've seen.
I still have so many unanswered questions about the sigils or whatever is on Zavander's arm.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like obviously that's something that helped him protect himself against Kadavros. But like, what does that mean? Like, how is that repelling and protecting Zavander? Like, is it for some divine reason?
And he, so far, we're pages into this book. He's the only character that we know of that has these markings. So they seem to be connected to this encounter with Cadavros, but how did they come to be and what do they mean? What are they going to mean going forward in the story?
Yeah, and I feel like even the parallel between Branimir and Zavander, like, and whatever Branimir said, what is taken will never return. That is creepy for like a random kid that's been cursed.
Right.
It just leads me to wonder, like, will he become a villain?
Do we think that was that coming from Branimir? Was that through this whole like magical curse encounter thing that's going on? Is there like a spirit that is manifesting through him? What do we read on that interaction?
100%. I mean, it sounds like he's been pretty taken by whatever's plaguing him. So it has to mean something deeper than just his little brother saying some words. Like that, it's a little too
Right.
prophetic. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah, it definitely interests me how he's going to become a bigger character throughout the book.
Yeah, I also think that maybe that phrase, as ambiguous and mysterious as it is intended to be our first true breadcrumb that's kind of paving the way. Maybe that is like an anchoring message, establishing a theme in our story that we're going to be able to come back to. And that maybe it doesn't just apply to Savander, but maybe it's something we're going to see occur over and over again in the story is as things are taken from people, we know that there is a marked shift in who they are or their life or whatever it is where you just can't go back.
And then we're introduced to Maevyth.
That's right. So we're getting our first POV. We get our first Maevyth chapter. So the very first thing that we get as we are introduced to Maevyth on that first chapter are some eerie symbols that we're seeing connected to that chapter page. So we see a bird, a crescent moon, and a black rose. And we don't know what they mean. They seem to be hinting at her mysterious past. It seems like we learn quickly that as a baby, she was found near the cursed eating woods or the witch knell. Those words are used interchangeably under a bone arch with a single black rose. And this feeling that Maevyth's life has always carried this dark supernatural edge. What an introduction.
Right.
Yeah.
So we've got the Eating Woods, Maevyth being abandoned as a child near those woods and ultimately seen as this cursed being in a very ultra religious village of Foxglove. Her adoptive father dies, one of the only people who really gave her an olive branch for her curseness, leaving her stuck with her grandma, Agatha, who's a real gem, and her uncles, the lovely uncles.
Yes. It's
So,
nice to get some wicked step uncles for a change.
right? It is. It's always the stepsisters, but we've got a nice stepsister in this one. So Maevyth gets a letter informing her of her father's death. And this is sort of where we start to see some hints at what Maevyth truly is. So she writes, "The red god isn't real" on the letter, but it changes to "God is death." Ooh, ominous.
Ominous.
And it sucks for Maeve because she's already been ostracized. She's already played for a fool amongst her community. So she obviously can't let anyone know that she might, in fact, actually be cursed. And when she tries to retrieve the letter, she cuts herself on the bone arch. And this is truly where shit starts to hit the fan. At this point, you're feeling bad for Maevyth, but it's really hard to not believe that she's an outcast.
Yeah, she's one of a kind. The way that Keri describes this point of the book just gives us our first real taste of the poetry that's tied in with this eerie story that we're reading. So she writes, "As I watched, curls of white smoke drifted from the bone, and one red drop of blood seared to black. Light shimmered across my eyes, the entire forest rippling with a translucent sheen. Then the words seemed to whisper Maevyth's name, and we hear a child giggle. Then it says, 'God is death.'"
Not the child giggling. I think that's the creepiest thing. Like in any horror film, it's always the child that's the most terrifying.
Yes. The little creepy laughter of children,
Ooh.
the child ghosts. But when I was reading this a second time around, I was refreshing and preparing for our episode. I caught a totally different interpretation of this very short quote. Did it remind you at all of a glimmering wall that we happen to come in contact with further into this part? Also, maybe an idea of like a glamour, so something that could only be seen by witches and mages.
Definitely not something I would have caught on the first read. Like the translucent shine, was it? Yeah. That's definitely not something I would have caught.
There's also in this moment where she's got the paper and she's written the words and it goes away, there's a moment where it talks about her feeling rage and she wants to scream. And I didn't really think about this the first time around either, but oftentimes in fantasy stories, there is a real connection between magic and emotions. And so I don't know if that's a coincidence or not, but there does seem to be this maybe shift that occurs. She's looked out on these woods before and she's never noticed anything. And now after she hurts her arm, she seems to notice there's something beyond around this arch that she's never noticed before. So she starts having a weird reaction to the injury, to put it lightly. Ravens start flying around and a raven hurts itself on the bone arch and she feels she has no choice but to kill this raven. So she buries it. And meanwhile, the blood of her wound and the ravens mingle together. The men of our parish believe the birds to be an omen of death. They believed the same of me too. So maybe I shared a kinship with the foreboding creatures. It was said that on the day I'd been found near the woods, ravens had flocked around my basket. I liked to think they were guarding me, but some thought it was a sign, a terrible sign.
Well, of course they would. They're like the most superstitious, intense community I've ever seen. The community of Foxglove is just so superstitious that they're going to think anything is a sign. There's some undertones that Keri is sort of playing with here. I wouldn't even call it undertones.
Yeah.
Overtones at this point, but I'm definitely feeling some pulls with like the patriarchy and our current society and sort of drawing parallels to that. So I'm excited to see if that continues throughout the book. I'm hoping it does, and I'm not wrong. I think it could be really cool to see that come together a little bit throughout the plot.
Well, we love a strong female author because they have a reason to represent our women well, right? So hopefully we are just getting that solid foundation of a terrible motivator for Maevyth to break free from this caged community she lives in. So in the land of Foxglove Parish, which is in Mortasia, the Red God's followers purify their devotion by banishing sinners to the Eating Woods. So we learn what the Eating Woods are. We don't really know a ton about them, but we do know that they're used for banishing. We learn within the first number of chapters, there's a man who we see being condemned. And at the ceremony that the whole community attends, he grabs Maevyth and she can see a crescent moon symbol and he grabs Maevyth's wound and repeats, God is death. So we get that phrase again, the connection to the crescent moon that we saw earlier on. And it's feeling like this is maybe the first of a number of dark encounters that Maevyth is going to have. So shortly after that, she learns that her great-grandmother, Agatha, is going to marry her off to a sinister man named Mr. Morose, who is only made creepier by the fact that he seems really nice. So a couple things that are going on right off the bat. We know that she wrote the Red God isn't real on that envelope. And then that's the phrase that turned into God is death. So now we've got this condemned man whispering God is death to her. A few layers already showing themselves. And I wanted to dig in on this red god thing and see, is this something that exists somewhere else? And you know what? As a matter of fact, yes. In Greek mythology, the god of death is Aethyria, which is the name that the red god is also given in Anathema. And this god decides when and where each soul will perish according to his divine plan. So failure to respect proper funeral rites or otherwise disrespecting the god of death is what leads to the creation of the undead as a divine curse. So this really begs the question, Could Maevyth be cursed by Sadie's, or is she maybe chosen? Because we're getting these immediate connections to the god of death, gods, curses, and the banishing woods, and it's feeling eerie yet intentional. So what do you think, Kara?
Honestly, right away, I have just been getting the Handmaid's Tale vibes from this whole thing. I'm feeling like that might be a possible influence. Like I'm kind of picturing Glenn getting her tongue cut off,
Mm-hmm.
especially with the red veils. It feels like symbols of more so devotion / control. And that's actually what the whole community of Foxglove is kind of giving me. I
Mm-hmm.
don't know if I feel like she was cursed by the red god, but I do feel like whatever god that Foxglove has concocted for itself isn't real.
Right.
Is the red god just a form of control rather than
Mm-hmm.
real and true?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and we see like that is a theme that is often used, right? Religion is a form of control.
Hmm.
It makes me wonder if Keri is playing with that concept. And so we get the Foxglove Parish where it does appear that way. Religion, the ideas of power and control, they're all tied together. But at the same time, we're seeing these fantasy elements that are connected to Maevyth. So it feels like there's this element of truth, and the themes that we're getting around the god of death. The idea of God is being used in this community is based on lies, but that there's an undertone of truth that's connected to this God. So maybe they are really not serving this God, but the God does exist.
I like that you said that because I think it is something that's kind of misconstrued into whatever the person that's attached to it can feel.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Like there can be a lot of bias drawn into that. So I think you're right, whether or not this god exists. But if we go back to the man that was banished, I feel like there's a lot of old god believers, perhaps, in Foxglove. We've heard some whisperings in Keri's writing of a few. Like, I'm curious how this is going to come together with the history of the red god. Like, how is that going to connect? Could that man be part of a resistance?
Mm-hmm.
I could kind of see it circling back to Mortasia at some point. So I'm dying to know how the old gods and the red god connect throughout all of this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm really curious too. I think it's not a coincidence that she's used words that connect to Greek mythology, gods that actually exist, that have a reputation. I think we're just being given this veil of a community where what we are supposed to believe about these gods and these beliefs are not what they're made out to be. There is probably something to be afraid of. It's just not what the people of Foxglove Parish are telling everyone it is.
Maevyth, she doesn't really have any options. They're looking grim. She either has to marry, she either has to escape, or essentially become a handmaid. So those are her choices.
Yeah, not great.
But in the meantime, things start to progress with Maevyth's haunting, or what we'll call a haunting, spiraling into some pretty eerie territory.
I mean, she starts to have some pretty weird hallucinations of ghosts. We see the man from the banishing appears in her bed, covers her mouth, and shortly after that, her sister Alicia notices the Maevyth's wound. So if we recall, she cut herself on this bone arch. It starts to get a lot worse. And then we have this kind of warm and fuzzy interaction between the sisters where Alicia asks Maevyth to sing her a song to help her go to sleep. And she sings her this song, Go My Darling, to help her sleep, which is a connection back to her grandfather, who she saw grieving his wife's loss. And I just have to say that I think this song is going to come back because the words of this song feel so symbolic. And when they go to the effort of writing this sort of poem or song, it usually has a bit of a chord connected to what's going to happen in the story. So we won't go through it, but that's just like a little tip on my end. I feel like it's feeling optimistic, but is it? Maybe not.
I didn't feel like that part was warm for some reason. Like, I know it was kind of like a nice moment between her and her sister, but I pictured it being like very gothic, eerie, like an organ in the background strumming the keys. Like, I don't know why, but I just didn't see it as it felt very morose. Felt very morose to me.
Yeah, also not an accident. I mean, I don't think anything in this story is warm. I noticed as I was reading the first part of this book that I pictured the entire story in black and white. There's a couple objects and things that are brought up that then I pictured, say, the color red. Everything is in this like grayscale color palette in my head. So nothing is warm. Nothing.
That's so interesting. I felt the exact same way. I feel like that's Keri Lake. Like, how does she do that? I
Yeah.
just don't know how she does that, because I feel like every other book that I've read and talked about with anyone, there's always been differences in how you see characters, what you sort of envision in your own mind. Keri Lake is just such an amazing writer that she's able to bring both of us to a very similar place.
Yeah, I think she's very intentional about what she describes, and she chooses to describe things darkly. And so then you're left to fill in the blanks, and the blanks you fill in are like grays and whites and not color. I remember even when she was describing Zavander and she talks about him having like a bit more of an olive complexion, it was like, oh, weird. There's like a little drop of color here in this palette that I just haven't noticed before.
Right. Now that we've read a little bit further, I'm starting to see more color.
So her wound, it really spirals after that. So she develops a fever, she comes near death, and Maevyth dreams of a dark scene. A woman and a man dressed in armor who takes the woman and drops her off the edge of the world. Then she sees a raven before awakening, and she finds that her wound is fully healed and now resembling a feather with a silvery flow along the edges, and part of her iris has turned silver. So Alicia comes in and she's shocked, she's happy, Maevyth is up and about, but she also tells her that she had a horrific night and she was dead for over 8 minutes. That's a lot to take in.
I feel like that was some sort of an initiation. Somehow it feels like she's magic now.
Right.
I've read too many fantasy books, but I don't think that it was an accident that she died. I think she's either still dead and like a haunted thing, a ghost, or she was reborn somehow.
Now, I mean, there's like potentially a parallel here too. Like the beginning of the story, we hear about Zavander being thrown into like a fissure of this volcanic magic place, and he comes out unscathed. And maybe something similar happened to him. Like he was like burned, but then okay. And so maybe her experience is like echoing a similar thing connected to dark magic or these spiritual beings that seem to be whirling around her.
I feel like there's equally as much that happened here, just in a totally different way than Zavander. So I feel like we'll be able to make so many more connections once we get through Zavander's part.
One more thing on this I wanted to highlight. So they talk about her eye, and they talk about how there's like this ring, or the way that I envision it is that maybe it's like the crescent moon. The crescent moon shape is showing up in her eye in this like silver slice.
Ooh.
But it kind of reminds me of a mating bond that I have read in other books. So maybe a long shot, but I thought, could it be that she's symbolizing this kind of bond that Maevyth has with the god of death? By being reborn, by being connected to this dark, deathly energy, is she now bound to that?
Ooh, I like that theory. Yeah, I feel like I almost wonder, like cutting herself on the bone arch, did that somehow make her part of the eating woods where the god of death is from? She's marked somehow by this paranormal fantasy world. We just don't know how.
Yes, and we're going to dig a little bit into that. Our new friend, the Crone Witch, has some thoughts on that, doesn't she? So before we meet the Crone Witch, Maevyth is up in her room. She notices a couple boys playing by the arch. She sees them through a window, and she needs to go investigate. She's worried they're going to find this raven that she's buried. So she goes out. Weirdly, no boys to be found. They're gone. But she does end up digging into the ground and finding this black and silver egg. scaled and oval, bearing a striking resemblance to the details of her scar.
If I were Maevyth, I would have just left that egg where it was and said, this, I'm already like seen as cursed. We're not going any further than this. But she keeps putting herself in these compromising situations.
But I have to say, I would take the egg. I would for sure. I have a chance at what looks like maybe a tiny dragon egg. Like, I'm taking the egg. I want the dragon. I want to have the baby dragon.
That's fair. I think I've just watched too many horror movies. Like, I would definitely be the person that's like, the first sign of a haunting or a ghost, I'd be out the door. I'd be flying across the world. We'd be gone. So Maevyth, honey, I cannot get behind you on this one.
No. All these ghosts and things. Yeah, we're gonna have to call for help here.
Right. And this is our first true appearance of the Crone Witch. The witch tells Maevyth the egg is her penance, a life for a death, which makes that connection to Maevyth's ability to possibly see the dead. This is the first time the Crone Witch has kind of come into play and made her presence known. And at this point, we sort of know that Maevyth is different. It's not a secret. There's not really a doubt in our minds that she's cursed. And if I were a red god believer, it would be straight to the woods at this point. She would have to be going. But I also feel like her dream had a really significant meaning. And I wonder too if the dream has something to do with her true origins and family.
I had a bit of a hot take here. So in one of the Zavander chapters that we will be touching on, but that you should have read, listeners, so hopefully you're not spoiling anything, we learn about the Unravel. So this magical archway that separates the mortal world, Mortasia, and Aethyria, the magical world. And it seems that this is the archway that has appeared to Maevyth when she cut her arm. And it suggests that maybe this is among one of the changes that's taken place in her at that time that allows her to see this umbra veil that she couldn't see before. We also learn that only the blood of the 7 bloodlines can pass through the umbra veil. And if anyone else attempts to cross, they risk falling over the cliff into an abyssal trench between the 2 worlds. So I think that's what we're seeing in this dream. And maybe, could it be Maevyth's mother that she's dreaming about? And maybe a fatal end that she came to? There's this concept that we're introduced to in part 1, a place that's described, the name is Aethyria, and we don't really know where it is, but it's just kind of like referenced here and there. And some people believe that it resided at the bottom of this miles deep crevice that was between Hagsmist and the mortal lands, which feels like it's kind of in and around this place we're talking about. There do feel to be these very little threads of a connection that we're getting here that I agree. I think it could be connected to Maevyth's origin and the people who she may belong to.
I never would have caught that Hagsmist thing, but you're probably right. I also wondered with the dream, I like the theory that it has something to do with her family.
Mm-hmm.
I wonder, could it have been the old gods? We haven't really heard much about the old gods. And so I'm curious if, because Maevyth has been cursed or marked, that this could have something to do with them. And maybe she's seeing visions of what has come in the past.
Yeah, it feels like it could be anyone, because so far we've seen her having these interactions with spirits kind of randomly, like she doesn't necessarily know them. So we don't know who this woman is. We don't know who the man is either. I think it's natural to assume that we're witnessing something with Cadavros because he's the big bad that we know of. He's really the only element in that way that we know of. So I think that's kind of a natural assumption, but I do like that we're getting these little hints toward the story that's beyond and how we have these very separate parallel storylines going on between Maevyth and Zavander. And this is maybe giving us our first little thread of how their stories might connect.
Also, though, who is the Crone Witch? Like, where did this random curmudgeon-esque lady come from? It feels like she just sort of cropped out of nowhere.
Yes.
And how has she been allowed to stay in Foxglove? Like, why is Maevyth the topic of conversation when you've got someone named the literal Crone Witch that lives on the edge of the forest? Like, pardon?
She is the MVP. Like, she is top of my list at this point in the story. I just want more Crone Witch. Like every time she shows up, I'm like, what are you going to give us today? Give us some of your wisdom. And yeah, how you have just seemingly been given approval to exist with your witchy magical ways in this super controlling environment. Like, I just want to know everything about her.
Yeah. And even thinking back to her healing the mayor's son, there
Mm-hmm.
were some sort of rumblings about that and that she was allowed to live on the edge of the woods. Still kind of ostracized. She's still sort of in between Foxglove and the Eating Woods. So it makes me wonder, could her powers be connected to Aethyria?
Mm-hmm.
And is that why they're like, oh, you're really crazy and intense, but you can stay because you healed my son, but just stay a little bit over there. Stay to the woods.
I like the version of the story in my head where she's choosing to be separate. She's got her space. We don't know why. She's in her little cabin near this arch. We don't really know much, but she is connected to Maevyth's origin as well. They talk about her being kind of around when Maevyth was found with the rose in her little cradle thing. Maevyth doesn't really understand. Like, did you find me? Did you see me? Did you see my mother? And we don't really get the full details on that, but I think she knows more than she's letting on.
I think if there was a resistance, she would 100% be the ringleader of the resistance. I'm just hoping that that's the case. And there's a secret band of Foxglove rebels ready to strike when the Crone Witch says, let's do it. But I also wonder if this is just a theory and maybe it's crazy since there's still so much to unpack. But I wonder, could she be somehow a protector of Aethyria?
Mm-hmm.
Like, who in their right mind would live next to the Eating Woods if none other than the Crone Witch?
Right.
Seems like there's something there for sure.
I also think it's possible she's maybe protecting Maevyth. We don't know anything beyond the point
True.
where the story begins. Like, we get a very clear kind of slice of Maevyth's life. And I guess I'd be curious if she was connected in any way to Maevyth's arrival as a baby, then is she somehow here to be a guardian of some sort?
Maybe more to the story there. And I wonder if even throughout, we're going to see a bunch more of Foxglove and this community and the Red God. I don't feel like Keri Lake built up that creepy society for us not to rehash it at some point.
Yeah.
I wonder if we do start to see some flashbacks or get a little bit more of an understanding of who the Crone Witch is. She's still, from this part, probably my favorite. Really the only person I care about other than Maevyth.
Yeah.
So I hope that we get to see more of her.
I do too. Also, I feel like she's going to be sneaky beautiful. I feel like she is like haggard in this point in the story. There's a part of me that's like, there's going to be a moment in this series where some sort of magic happens and she's gorgeous. You just wait. I think she's going to have a big glow up.
See, crone for me does not really have any positive connotations, but
No.
this is the second time in one of our episodes that I thought someone was absolutely hideous and you thought that they were beautiful. And I think that's so interesting. But I hope that the Crone Witch has a glow up. I would love to see that happen, maybe in like a flashback in the past.
I don't think she's beautiful now, but like, no spoilers, but there is a witch that also shows up in Akatar that we all think is like old and ugly. And it turns out she's not. So I'm like, so wouldn't be the craziest thing for the Crone Witch to just be like hiding under an ugly old face mask? Okay, so next, Maevyth attends dinner with Mr. Moros, who she has been promised to marry, and a number of guests. She has quite an experience with all of the top tier citizens of Foxglove. Not entirely eventful. She wakes in the night, she's back at her house, and she finds Uncle Felix being the creepiest character we've ever met in our entire lives.
It's an understatement.
The only way to read is through, and you can't go around it. And you must read the creepy, horrific parts of all of the books.
The creepy uncles.
Yeah, so creepy. Defining the word creepy. So in the morning, we learn Alicia is pregnant, as if banging your step uncle was already not a good idea. Now she's knocked up in a place where definitely that is not allowed. So here we are, sitting with the last grains of optimism that we held for these girls, and it has been banished, just like Alicia.
Alicia, honey. what were you thinking? Like, what were you thinking? I know Maevyth and Alicia are so different. We haven't really touched on Alicia in this episode, mostly because I feel like she's an idiot, but I guess that's where we're at with her. And it serves a purpose. It's a catalyst for Maevyth to start to realize, like, oh shit, we really are fucked here. But it just makes me so sad that it seemed like that would be an out of character thing for her at first. Like, it seemed like she was a little bit more rebellious, maybe of the mind, like, we should get out of here, we should run away together. And then also at the same time is fucking her Uncle Felix. Just
with no tonics or anything. Not in this world. We're not taking a tonic.
right? It's just, that was absolutely wild for me.
Yeah. The things that you thought, no, that can't happen. And then it does. And you go, oh, Maevyth really has no one. This poor girl just tugging on all my heartstrings. But at least she's got the egg. Like, what's in the egg, Maevyth? Maybe you've got a friend after all.
Oh my gosh. Well, at this point too, she's been to Mr. Moreau's, and we know now at this point that he is respected in Foxglove. And I forget exactly what they called his like community of people, but it was something like village socialites or village elites. So I feel like there's more to that. Even with Uncle Felix, and the fact that he had Mr. Moreau's maid, I know that there's a connection between these like socialites and the predatory behavior that we're seeing in Foxglove. If these people are part of this elite social group, but they're also tampering down on everyone else's rights,
right?
Something is going on here. Actually alludes very much to the society we live in. I think that there's something more there that's going to come out related to the Red God somehow, potentially.
Interesting. Yeah, I mean, we didn't describe it in detail, but Maevyth gets woken up by the voice of a woman who is asking to be saved, who is crying for help, and she gets called down into the basement to see Uncle Felix defiling a dead body. And so there is this interesting dynamic between Maevyth and these dead or soon to be dead people seeking her help, it feels like. And so it does seem like this energy of the god of death or something. It's almost like what is going on in this community is being seen by a god, and they are not in favor of it, even going back to that Greek god, and that they set the rules. They expect for the funeral rites and for those who die to be chosen by them. And if you go against their law, then you will be punished. And so it's like Foxglove has tried to take those ideas and cast it upon their village, but really the gods will speak. And so maybe this is the beginnings of what they have to say and their plans for those that cross them.
That's a super interesting point, because what gods do we know about from the prologue? I remember the goddess of death, the god of chaos.
Right.
I think there was another one. I want to say fertility, but I might be making that up. But either way, the gods that were described in the beginning of the book, they don't feel anything like the Red God, to your point. The old gods were maybe something to be feared, and perhaps that's where the Red God came into play. And it's like, let's get a rein on this and control it with our own narrative. I feel like I've had to go back to the prologue a few times to remember names and bloodlines, but I definitely think that there's something there with the old gods versus this new Red God that we're seeing in Foxglove.
Yeah. And if you're listening and you're having a hard time keeping track, just know that we are too. We have a list. And if my last count is correct, I believe we were introduced to 25 characters in part 1 and like 18 places and a number of other words that don't fit into a category. So that is the world building that we love. And so we're just going to take our time. We're going to refresh ourselves on it.
We're just holding on for dear life.
Waiting for the dust to settle and for all of the things to fall into place, which the plot is coming.
Yeah.
Okay, so Maevyth wakes up in the night to a chilling moment. There's a man with a knife at her throat, but before she can react, he vanishes. And moments later, this egg of hers hatches, and it reveals a black-scaled creature with silvery eyes and taloned feet. Maevyth decides to name this creature Ravox, inspired by an ancient, fierce Voncovian plunderer who is a symbol of charm and violence. Maevyth goes to find the Crone Witch. She wants some advice, and she explains that Maevyth's wound, the blood that spilled on the bone, has bound her to the realm of the dead, and tells her, you walk between realms. The gods have chosen you as their vessel. Maevyth's connection to the dead is now being made eternal, and a bond that has altered her very existence. So a lot being revealed here. We love the Crone Witch. Please, thank you for telling us what is going on here. You could have told us a couple days ago maybe, but we'll take it. Maevyth is mothering this little creature that we don't know what it is. She loves this little thing already, which so do I. So I'm with you. But she's trying to figure out Ravox, like, what does it eat? How can she keep it out of trouble? Unfortunately, this little guy eats the family cat, making things really complicated, like as if Maevyth is not dealing with enough. Now she has to hide the body of the cat that this little creature has eaten. The little Ravox seems to be really cute. Definitely got a gory side. So it's got a taste for blood, that's for sure. Shortly after, Maevyth tries to figure out how to hide the body of the family cat that Ravox has eaten. Alicia has now confessed to being pregnant and is being taken for banishing, which absolutely devastates her and pushes her into sheer desperation.
Yes, our poor Alicia being taken away, heading towards banishment, leaving Maevyth in a really shitty situation. Aside from her father, pseudo-father, she really only had Alicia, and so now she has no one. I guess she has the Crone Witch. She now has the Crone Witch. But at this point, she gets brought to the Morose estate, where the arrangements for her forced marriage are getting finalized. Gotta love Grandma Agatha for just doing everybody wrong. She's horrible. I'm really hoping that we get some sort of redemption because she's been awful from start to finish.
Oh, yeah.
You can get fucked.
Yeah. I picture the nasty stepmother from Cinderella. You know, like the old gray tied up hair, like super old fashioned. That's what I picture.
Big
Never
old
smiles.
nose, hair is coming out everywhere, huffing and puffing.
Yeah.
It's just so horrific that she would give her step granddaughter to a absolute psycho like Morose, but she does. She gives Mr. Morose Maevyth. He takes Maevyth to his cellar, and we start to see his character unravel a little bit more. He's basically got this sickening lab of creatures that he's put together, very Madame Lalaurie coded anomalies that he's created with actual human beings. And we discover that he's created and bred this obsession with breaking the spirits of wild women. So that is huge. That just further cements his intentions. Personally, at first, I didn't think he was going to be that bad. I was very wrong. I think, Sarah, you were more on the right track about him.
I trust no one whose name is Mr. Morose in a gothic story.
Unfortunately, really, Maevyth has no choice. She just finds herself trapped in a nightmare, stuck with this ghastly man.
There seems to be a very dark and mutually beneficial relationship going on between grandmother Agatha and Mr. Morose. Like, we learn early on that she makes ointments and poisons, and she's got the girls helping, and they've got the mortuary in the basement, and this guy clearly has no problem finding a dead body for them to move through the business. So there feels like there's this kind of like cycle of darkness that's moving through these characters, and I do not want Maevyth to be anywhere near this guy.
I pegged him as a bit creepy. I didn't think he was going to be creating these weird ass pseudo humans in his basement. Like, that is just on a whole other level that I didn't expect. But Maevyth just finds herself tangled sort of in the middle.
Mm-hmm.
But the good news is that Maevyth gets this ominous message from the dead. And that's where things go crazy, telling her that she needs to escape, her and her sister.
It's time to go, Maevyth. And that is the end of part 1.
Wild.
That's all we get. So, and we haven't even talked about Savander. Like, there is still a whole other chapter within this whole section that we haven't even touched on, a whole other side to this plot.
I'm so glad that we split this into 2 parts because it was just so much with all of the world building that we got from one POV alone.
Mhm.
I just don't know that we would have been able to make sense of it.
No, and I think it was apparent really early on that Keri Lake is not just writing things for the sake of adding pages. She is giving us the layers that are going to set up a story to be gripping. And it was really hard to figure out what we could cut to make sure this was still like a valuable recap where we could talk about our thoughts and not have it be 5 hours long, because there was just so much packed in. Like, amazing writing on her behalf to be able to say so much in really not a crazy amount. Like 230 pages is not, that's not huge to be able to say all that we've just talked through and then a whole other character's plotline.
I've had to save a lot of my thoughts for the shower and just at night before I go to sleep, because you're absolutely right. 230 pages, and that's including Zavander's part.
Yeah.
I don't even know how we got this much plot. Like,
Yeah.
that is wild. And we still get a really lovely, spicy POV from Zavander.
I know it's been a little bit since we finished part 1, but can you go back in time and remember how you were feeling and what you were thinking about?
Yeah. So even just the prologue, I was like, what is actually going on here? Like I said, Keri Lake books have never taken me to a world with so much depth. It's always been in the realm of some sort of real-ish dystopian world, but never to this level. So I honestly felt like, at least for the prologue before we got into Maevyth's part, it was very Brandon Sanderson coded, like with all the different bloodlines, types of magic, all the characters. This is definitely a book that you need to highlight. But I still have so many questions. Like, there's so much that has gone unanswered here that I don't want to forget about. We almost need to draw a map. I'm curious to see at the end of this how many pages and pages of notes and theories that we have.
There seem to be these places that get mentioned here, there, and wherever else. Our friend Dolian, who we haven't talked about yet, is our little like historian, thank God, giving us these little nuggets of the world that this all takes place in and how people are connected, because otherwise we would have nothing.
I love Dolian. I can't wait to talk about him next episode. Just getting to see a little bit more of a peek into Zavander's world will be really fun for us to cover. But even the questions that have gone unanswered, even just for Maevyth's part right now, we know she has to plan her escape. Like, at this point, she's leaving. This ghostly voice came and told her, you need to go. And so even in the cover, we kind of assume that she goes to the Eating Woods, right? But could she be immune to the Eating Woods because she's been marked by them? Is there a chance that she won't be affected by them? Even just with the prologue, we 100% know that somehow Maevyth is connected to this Eating Woods, this other world. One of the things I mentioned was Cadavros making these bargains with Zavander's family.
Mm-hmm.
Probably not the only person he's bargained with. Does Maevyth appearing outside of the Eating Woods in Foxglove, could she have possibly suffered the same fate? Like, was she supposed to be made into a bargain somehow?
Right. Was she supposed to be sacrificed? I think you're right. I feel like Cadavros, his goal in that whole thing was to take the child's magic. Because you can be born with magic and then you can lose that magic. You have to be able to maintain it. So there is an element called vivicantum that has to be taken. And if you don't take it, then you lose your magic. And so there's clearly something with Cadavros that he needed a supply of magic and probably needed to get it from these mancers. So I'm sure Zavander's family, they were just one of many targets.
To see how that connects to Maevyth. And
Yeah.
I guess just in terms of her story, I feel like we're going to get some sort of coming of age. I definitely think it's like a coming of age training style story where she sort of figures out who she is, how she fits into this world. She's never been a part of her world in Foxglove, didn't even know this other world existed. So how is she going to take fate into her own hands? Is she going to escape?
Yeah.
I'm curious to see how that unfolds.
She is going to find her way. I think you're right. And I want Maevyth to come to be a powerful goddess.
I don't think she's going to take it lying down. I feel like Keri Lake alluded to some of her rage and anger at how she's been shunned. So I'm ready to see her fight back, especially with the Crone Witch. Like, please give me more of the Crone Witch. Don't let her go away and never be spoken of again.
Yeah, we need more Crone Witch. Absolutely.
Yes. And I'm super excited to get into Zavander's part. We covered so much, but there is still so much more to cover. So I can't wait till the next time. We'll be going over Zavander's POV. So if you haven't already, please read along. And if you do have a book that you want us to cover, something you're interested in, or even just have your own thoughts and insights on part 1, part 2, please just let us know. Send to songofsinandinnocence@gmail.com and join us for next time.